Hey guys, what's going on? It's Dave with Evil Eye Games. Today we're going to continue on with the fourth part of our tutorial in creating a cover shooter. So the first thing I want to do is I want to give us an actual test map. Right now when UE4 loads, it loads into this default map. So what we're going to do is in the content folder, we're going to right click and we're going to create a new folder and we're going to call this maps. And we're going to go up to File, Save As. We're going to select our Maps folder. And I'm going to give this map a name of Test Map. And then I want to take this floor object here, and I want to make it a bit bigger so we have some more area to run around on. So I'm going to scale it up in the x-axis. I'm going to go, let's try 7. And the y-axis, we'll try 3. So that gives us a bigger area to run around. And then I'm going to grab the player start and I'm going to drag it back over here towards one side. So that way if we hit play, we have a much larger area to actually run around on. Alright, so to actually implement a cover system, there are a couple different ways we can go about doing it. I want to use a event-driven cover system, basically to prevent toll on the CPU. So the first thing I'm going to do is, in the content folder once again, we're going to right-click and add a new folder. And we're going to call this folder Interfaces. And inside the Interfaces folder, I'm going to right-click, I'm going to go to Blueprints, and we're going to select Blueprint Interface. And I'm going to call this interface Cover Interface. And I misspelled it. There we go. And we're going to go ahead and open up this cover interface. And it's going to provide us with an unnamed function. And I'm going to rename this function isCoverAvailable. And I'm going to add two inputs to this function. The first input is going to be isCoverAvailable. The second is going to be cover rotation. And isCoverAvailable is going to be a Boolean. The cover rotation is going to be a rotator. So we're going to go ahead and compile and save. And that's all we're going to need to do in the interface right now. So we're going to go back over to our main window. And inside of Maps, I'm going to create a new folder. And I'm going to call this Common Objects. So I'm going to open up the Common Objects folder. I'm going to right click. And we're going to create a new Blueprint class. And we're going to make this an actor. And I'm going to name this Base Cover Object. So we're going to open up our base cover object. And there's basically nothing in it other than a scene root. So we want to actually add something for our player to take cover in. So I'm going to go into Add Component. And I'm going to search for a static mesh. And I'm going to name this static mesh cover object. And then over to the right hand side here in the details pane, there's going to be a section that says static mesh. So we're going to click on the drop down and we're going to see that there's nothing in here because we haven't added any static meshes to our project. So I'm going to go to View Options. I'm going to go to Show Engine Content. And this is going to give us all the basic content of the engine. And I'm going to search for cube. I'm going to take the first cube here, the static mesh, and we'll see that it added in a cube to our blueprint. We don't have, really right now we don't want to worry about material or anything else. We just want to have a object in here that we can take cover behind. Now, if you have custom static meshes or you want to make your own, you can go ahead and import them and base everything around this. Well, one thing you'll notice is that the scene root is in the center of our cube. So if we go back to our map and we drag this object into the map, it is going to center up on the center of the object. If we drag up on the object and hit N to bring it back down, it will basically collide with the center of the object and sit halfway in the ground. So we're going to take our static mesh and we're going to move the location. This cube is a 1 meter by 1 meter by 1 meter cube, so we want to move it up on the z-axis 50 centimeters. So if we compile and save that and go back to our map, it now sits flushly on the ground. So if we go back into our cover object here, we are going to add some collision boxes. So we're going to search under Add Component for Box, and we'll find our box collision. And I'm going to call this Cover Box 1. And I'm going to duplicate this, and we're going to name this Cover Box 2. So if we take Cover Box 1 here, I'm going to make the y-axis the lengthwise of this cover object. So we take cover box 1, we're going to drag it over to the side, and you see that this cover box is not quite a meter. It actually looks like it's 3/4 of a meter in size, so 75 centimeters. And we're going to take the second cover box and we're going to do the same thing. We're going to move it to the other side. So I'm just going to match up the height at 34 centimeters, and the location is going to be in the negative scale, so it's going to be negative 82 centimeters on the X. Alright, so we have an object that looks the same on both sides, but we want, in this case, a longer object. So I'm going to select the static mesh, and I'm going to scale this out on the y-axis. I'm going to make it a scale of 3, which will make it a 3 meter wide object. And then we're going to take our cover boxes, and we're going to have to scale these up as well. So if we go ahead and scale it out to 3 on both sides. Now you'll notice that since it's 3/4 of a meter object for the cover boxes, it's not completely filling out to the end of our actual static mesh. This isn't going to be particularly important because one thing you have to remember is there's a volume to the player character, and only a portion of the player character has to overlap with this cover box in order for it to work properly. Alright, so we're going to go ahead and compile and save our object. And the next thing we're going to do is we want to actually implement the cover interface. So, under Class Settings, on the right hand side for Details, there is a section for Interfaces. We're going to go ahead and click on Add, and we're going to add our cover interface. So now this object will be able to use that cover interface. So we're going to hit compile and save. We're going to go over to our event graph, and we're not going to need any of these, so I'm going to go ahead and delete those. And we want to get a reference to our cover boxes. So if we click in the Components tab on the left on cover box 1, we're going to right click, we're going to add an event, collision, and begin overlap. And we're also going to want a end overlap. Now keep in mind, anytime you click in the event graph, it is going to deselect the selected component on the left there. So you're going to have to click on cover box 1 again, right click in the graph, add event, collision, and we're going to add an end overlap. And then we're going to do the same thing for cover box 2. So once again, we're going to add event, collision, begin overlap, and add event, collision, end overlap. So each of our cover boxes now have an event when something begins overlapping with it and when it ends overlapping with it. So we're going to go ahead and call on the interface. So I'm going to drag off of the cover box 1 here, and we're going to search for is cover available. And we're going to see in here a couple of different things. What we're looking for is the is cover available message. And what this is going to do is it's going to send a message using our is cover available function to the other object. Now it needs a target, so from our begin overlap there is the other actor pin. So this is the other actor that has collided with our collision box. So we're going to drag off from the other actor and we're going to plug that into the target. And if our character begins overlap, we want to set is cover available to true. And I'm going to go ahead and copy this message, one for each event. And we're going to connect up the pins for the execution and the other actor on all 4 of these. And the one thing we're going to want to change right now in particular is the end overlap. When we walk out of the box, we want to make sure that we don't have it set so that cover is available. So for both of the end overlap events, we're going to make sure that is cover available is false in the message. Now I also added in this cover rotation. So we want to know which direction from our actor the cover is facing. So we're going to go back into our viewport and we're going to go ahead and in the components tab add a component called arrow. And I'm going to call this arrow 1. And I'm going to duplicate it and we'll call this arrow 2. Now arrow 1, I'm going to drag and drop on cover box 1 so it's parented to cover box 1. And arrow 2, I'm going to drag and drop to cover box 2 so it's parented to cover box 2. Now we're going to want to go ahead and arrange these objects. So we're going to take cover box 1 here, it's this object, and we're going to select our arrow. We're going to drag it out and we're going to rotate it around so it faces in towards our cover. And I'm going to move it up and we're going to scale it down so that we can see the entire arrow to 0.5. All right, and then we're going to grab our second arrow and we're going to copy the location settings. So X is 27, Z is 0, but since it's on the opposite side, we're going to make the X a negative 27 and the Z will be fine as a 0. And we'll set the scale as 2.5. So right now, each cover box has an arrow attached to it. And it's facing inwards towards the cover. So we can use these arrows to pass the rotation of where they're facing onto our player character so the player character knows which way the cover is. So if we go back over to our event graph, I'm going to go ahead and drag off arrow 1. And that'll give us a reference to that arrow. And we want to get the rotation of this arrow. And we're going to select Get World Rotation. And we're going to plug this into the cover rotation on our begin overlap. Now, for the end overlap, we don't really care anymore about the rotation at this point. So we're going to leave this unplugged and the values at 0. Then for cover box 2, we're going to drag out arrow 2. We're going to do the same thing where we're going to get the world rotation. And we're going to plug that into the cover rotation. And what this is going to do is that will in fact pass off the value of the direction that the arrows are pointing to our player character when we implement it. So If we go back into our test map here, you're going to see that there's this object. We have the cover boxes on each side, and we have arrows facing inward. Now these cover boxes and the arrows, if we hit play, are not going to be visible in-game. They exist, but they're not rendered. So I'm going to save all. And for now, that's going to finish us up in the base cover object. So I'm going to go ahead and close that out. And we're going to next have to go into our player character. And in the 3P player character that we created, we don't have anything in here as of yet. But we're going to want to go to class settings. And under interfaces, we're going to add the interface, cover interface, and compile and save. So at this point, our character will be able to receive messages from that cover interface when anything sends that message to it. So we're going to right click on the graph, and we're going to search for is cover available, and we're going to add the event. So when a message is sent to it over the interface, it's going to call this event, and it's going to pass through the information that we outlined in this particular function within the interface. So it'll give us the value of is cover available, and it's going to give the value of cover rotation. So we're going to want to take these variables that are coming in, and we're going to want to go ahead and promote them to variables. So for the is cover available, I'm going to call this cover available. I can't name this one in particular the same as the interface because it's already an existing event named is cover available. So if you try typing in to set the variable name to is cover available, it'll throw up an error and say that it already exists. And then for the cover rotation, I'm going to promote that to a variable as well, and we're going to call it cover rotation. So when our character walks into our cover boxes, it's going to pass through this information at this point, and it's going to give us whether or not cover is available and whether or not cover or what the cover rotation is, and it's going to set those variables. So to check on this, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add in a print string. I'm going to actually add in 2 of those, and I'm going to connect them up, and we'll connect the cover available variable to the first print string and the cover rotation to the second one. So if we hit compile and save and go into play, if we walk into our cover box, you're going to see at the top there's a rotation and a true or false is set. So when we enter the box, it'll give us a rotation, and it'll set is cover available to true. If we move out of the box, it'll set is cover available to false, and it'll set the rotation to a 0 value. So we can go ahead and get rid of these print strings. Everything seems to be firing as intended. The next thing we're going to have to do is actually give our player character the ability to take cover. So we're going to go into our project settings and our input, and I'm going to add a new action mapping, and I'm going to call this action mapping cover button. And I'm going to make the cover button the spacebar. So we're going to close out of our project settings. Now we could add the button event into the player character right here, but I want to keep all of our controls within the player controller. So we're going to go ahead and open up our player controller, find an empty space, and we're going to search for cover button. So when this cover button fires, we want to trigger something within the player character. So we're going to go back over to our player character, and we're going to create a custom event. And we're going to call this one Take Cover. So at our player controller, we're going to need to be able to call that. And I'm going to go up to the top of the graph, and I'm going to add in our begin play event. And off of the begin play event, we're going to want to get our player character and assign it to a variable so that we can reference our player character whenever we need to within this graph. So I'm going to right click in the graph here, and we're going to get player character, and we're going to want to cast this player character to our 3P player character. And I'm going to go ahead and promote this to a variable, and we're going to call this variable player character. So now we have a reference to our player character that we can call whenever we need it. So back at our cover button, I'm going to get our player character reference, and we are going to call that event take cover. So we'll go ahead and plug that in. We're going to compile and save, and then we can go back over to our player character. We have to figure out what we're going to do when this take cover event fires. The first thing we're going to want to check is if we're actually already taking cover or not. Now, we have no way set to do that already, so I'm going to add in a new variable, and I'm going to call this is taking cover. And we're going to drag this out. We're going to get it, and then we're going to add in a branch. And we're going to plug up is taking cover to the branch. So first we're going to check to see if we're already taking cover. Now what we want to happen is if we're already taking cover, we want to not take cover if we hit the button. So we want to flop it. So we're going to go ahead and take out is taking cover, and we're going to set it to false. So if we're already taking cover, we want to set to not take cover. Now if we're not already taking cover, we want to go ahead and check to see if cover is available. So we're going to get our cover available. We're going to add in a branch and plug that up. So if cover is available at this point, we want to set is taking cover to true. So if there's cover for us to take cover in, we want to take that cover. If it is set to false and there's no cover available, we don't actually want to do anything at this point. So we're going to drag this over, and for, I guess, redundancy, I'm going to go ahead and drag in another is taking cover here, and we're going to set it to false in the event that cover is not available. So this will just ensure that if we hit the cover button and we're not taking cover, that we're not actually taking cover. So we can go ahead and compile and save that for now. So we have a way to tell our player character whether or not we're taking cover or not in the event of hitting the spacebar. So what we're going to have to do next is actually add in the animations to take cover. So we're going to have to open up our anim BP, and we're going to have to get those values. So I'm going to go ahead, and this is the setup for our aim offset. So I'm going to add in a comic box right here, and I'll call it aim offset. And we're going to drag this out of the way. And what we're going to need to do here is from our character, we're going to need to check to see is taking cover. And we want to promote that to a variable. So we're going to go ahead and plug that in, and then we'll reconnect our aim offset. And we'll go ahead and compile and save. And we're going to have to go over to our anim graph now, and we're going to have to add in animations that allows our player to take cover. In order to do this, we're going to have to find an animation, in our animation set. And for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm only going to handle low cover. So objects that are a meter or approximately a meter in height, I'm not going to actually use the standing cover. Basically, it's for simplicity's sake. So what we're going to search for in our assets folder here is we're going to want the cover low, and we want to find our idle to cover. Now there's 4 options in here. 2 of them are root motion, 2 of them are the non-root motion, and each set goes to either a left pose or a right pose. Personally, I think it's more natural that if somebody were to go into cover up against a wall, they would go towards their non-dominant arm. And since our animations are right-handed, we're going to go ahead and make it so he goes into the cover left. That'll put his left arm up against the wall. So we're going to select the animation here, and we want to make sure it's the root animation. So we're going to right-click and find in Content Browser, and the one I selected does reside in the root motion folder. So we're going to go ahead and drag this out, and I'm going to call this Take Cover. And the states we're going to want to move into this from are from the rifle walk animation, and we also want to be able to take cover from the sprinting animation. So we're going to drag these transition rules from rifle walk to take cover and from sprinting to take cover. Now for the transition rule to get there, we are going to want to get that variable we just pulled up is taking cover. So we're going to get that, and we're going to just straight plug it in. So if taking cover is set to true, we'll go ahead and play this animation. And same thing with the sprint to take cover. Now this take cover is a one-time animation. We only want it to play once, otherwise it's just going to loop over and over. And we're moving into the cover right. We're going to want to search in the asset browser here for our cover right. So I'm going to search for cover R, and we have a cover low underscore cover R. So once again, we're going to want to find in our content browser and make sure it's the root motion animation. The one I have selected is the in place animation, so I'll select the other one and we'll drag it out. And I'm going to call this cover right. And we're going to create a transition from the take cover to the cover right. And that transition rule is going to be the time remaining. So we're going to search for ratio, select time remaining, and we're going to check to make sure that it is less than 0.4. And we're going to plug that in. And we're going to compile and save all of this. So if we go to test this out, we're going to move up to our cover box where we know it is. I'm going to hit the space bar. He plays the animation and he moves into cover. Now, we can't really do much from this point because there's no transitions out of that cover. So even hitting the cover button doesn't do anything, and we can't really move around yet. But we'll go ahead and take care of that next. So we'll go back to our anim graph. All right, and we're going to go ahead and add in our ability to turn left and right. So I'm going to search for the cover low, cover L. And once again, we want to make sure that we're selecting the root animation. And we're going to go ahead and drag this out into the graph. And I'm going to call this cover left. And we're going to want to create a transition between the two of these, because otherwise he'll just morph from the cover right position to the cover left position, and it won't look very good. So in our sets here of animations, there's the cover left to cover right, and the cover right to cover left. So we want to check once again. We want to make sure that it is the root motion that we're using. So here's the cover right to cover left. I'm going to drag this in, and I'm going to call it cover right to cover left. make a little more room in here. And then we want to find the cover left to cover right. Once again, we want to make sure that it is the root motion. We're going to drag that out, and I'm going to call this one cover left to cover right. And we're going to go ahead and drag the transition rules around so that it makes sense. So from cover right, we're going to go to cover right to cover left, and from cover left, we're going to go to cover left to cover right. So the transition rules for these, from cover right to cover left, we're going to get our move right value. And since we're moving from right to left, left is a negative value, we want to make sure that move right is less than 0. And we'll go ahead and plug that in. And from cover left to cover right, the transition rule is going to be the opposite. So we want to make sure that this is greater than 0. And then to complete the transitions from the transition animations over to each cover, we're going to open each one up. We're going to search for ratio and get the time remaining. And we want to make sure that it is less than 0.4 for each. Now, one thing to note here with these time remaining ratios is you can't just copy and paste these into other animations because it is specifically looking at a certain animation. So if you were to copy and paste this to the other transition, it would not ever fire. So once again, we're going to look for a ratio, get time remaining, and check to see if it's less than 0.4. And connect that up. We'll go ahead and compile and save. So if we go ahead and play, we can move up to our cover, we can move into the cover, and then he can swap back and forth. So that's pretty much the limitation of what we can do right now. The next thing I want to do is add in his ability to move left and right. So we're going to go back to our event graph here. And in the asset browser, we're going to look through our animations here. And we're going to look for the walk left and walk right animations under cover low. Now there's start and stop animations for these. I don't find that they're particularly necessary to make a smooth transition. So we're going to get the cover low, cover walk. And once again, we want to make sure it's the root motion. This is very important. So we're going to drag out the cover low, walk right. We're going to call this cover walk right. And we're going to want to find the cover low, walk left as well. So that is the root animation. We're going to drag this out, and we're going to call this cover walk left. So I'm going to line these up nice over here, and we're going to create a transition rule from cover left to walk left and back, and same thing with cover right to cover walk right and back. So for the transition rule from cover left to cover walk left, we're going to get our move right value, and we're going to check to see if it's less than 0. If it's less than 0, we're going to move right, or correction, if it's less than 0, we're going to move left. And the transition rule back is going to be the move right again, and we're going to want to check to see if it is greater than or equal to 0. And then for cover right, we're going to do very similar. We're going to get our move right, and we're going to check to see is it greater than 0. And for the transition back, we're going to get our move right and check to see if it is less than or equal to 0. So we'll go ahead and hit compile and save, and let's test it out. So we can move into cover, we can walk to the right, we can flip around and walk to the left, and everything seems all hunky-dory. The one issue we're going to have right now is the player is still using the yaw, so our character is going to rotate with our camera. So as we move it around, he is going to rotate with us, and we're going to take care of that later. But right now, if we walk to the right and we get out of the edge of cover, he doesn't have any way to transition back yet. So we're going to have to add in a transition to our character so that he can move back to his up and standing state. So we're going to get an animation that is going to set him from the cover to the standing state. So we're going to have to look for cover L to idle. Once again, we're going to check to see if it is in the root motion folder. So our cover left animation here, we're going to call cover left to idle. And then we're going to want to find the cover right to idle animation as well. So we have the cover right to idle. Once again, checking to make sure it is the root motion. And we're going to drag that animation out here. And I'll call it cover right to idle. And this is where our animation graph is going to start to get really messy. Unfortunately, I haven't figured out a way to make it any more neat, but such is what we're going to have to deal with. So, from the cover left side, we're going to drag an animation from cover left to idle. And we're also going to move from the cover walk left to idle. And then we're going to make the transition down to both the rifle walk and then from the cover right idle down to rifle walk. And then we'll connect cover right to the cover right to idle and cover walk right down to the cover right to idle as well. So we're going to have to define these transitions. So for cover left to idle, we're just going to basically take our is taking cover value, and we want to check to see if it's false, so we're going to add a not operator into it and plug that in. And we're going to do the same thing for the cover walk left. And for this, we can actually just use a copy paste for these operations. So I'm going to head and copy that. And then for the cover right to idle, we're going to copy in that same operation. So is not taking cover. And the same thing for the cover walk right to idle. So these four transitions from cover walk left and cover left to idle and cover right and cover walk right to idle have all been filled out. So we're going to have to fill in the transition from cover left to idle to rifle walk and cover right to idle to rifle walk as well. So we're going to double click it first on the cover left to idle transition. We're going to go ahead and search for ratio and get the time remaining. And we're going to check to see if it is less than 0.4. And we're going to go ahead and plug that in. And we're going to do the same thing for the cover right to idle. And I'm going to compile and save. So we now have transitions that we can make from being in cover to not being in cover. So let's go ahead and test it out. So if we walk up to our cover here and hit the button, we can get into cover. If we hit the cover button again, he will stand back up. So we'll go ahead and enter cover again. We can move left and we can move right. And we can enter cover from each position and exit cover from each position. And also, if we make off the edge of the cover here, it doesn't look like anything is actually transitioning us over. So let's go ahead and open up our player character here. And for the event is cover available, we're going to add a branch to the end of this. And we're going to connect our cover available up. And we want to check to see if this is false. So if this is false, we're going to go ahead and I'm going to copy this is taking cover over here. And we're going to plug that up. So we'll hit compile and save. And we'll hit play. So now, if we get to the edge of cover, he's going to go ahead and stand up, going in both directions. So we can move back and forth, and all is well. And we can enter and exit cover. Now, we still have to handle the issue of our player character rotating with us. So in our player character right here, after we set the is taking cover, we're going to want to pull off, and we're going to want to search for use yaw, and we're going to get the option for a set use controller rotation yaw. And I'm going to paste that one for each event. And we're also going to want to stick it to the end of this automatic uncover up here. Now, the way this is going to work is when we are regularly moving around, we're using the controller rotation yaw so that the character rotates with our controller. So when we are not taking cover, we want use controller rotation yaw to be true. So we're going to check all the options here where is taking cover as false, use controller rotation yaw is going to be true. Another way you can actually set this up is you can drag off of is taking cover, perform a not operation, and then plug it into the use controller rotation yaw. And this will automatically fill out everything for you. So that way you don't have to worry about whether or not you're using the cover rotation yaw and whether you set it correctly. This will automatically set it all for you. So if we go hit and compile and save and we go to test this, we hit play, we hit into cover, and then our camera is free to move around our character at this point. Now the other thing we're going to have to address too is if we exit out of cover and we enter cover at a weird angle, our character doesn't align up with the cover. Now, in the is cover available event, we did get the rotation of those arrows. So what we're going to need to do is when we actually take cover, so this one option in the middle here of our take cover event, we're going to use that cover rotation. So we're going to drag off of our use cover or use controller rotation yaw, and we're going to set actor rotation. And we're going to set it on ourselves so we don't have to plug anything into the target. And we're going to get our cover rotation, and we're going to plug this into the new rotation. So if we compile and save and hit play, if we run up to this cover at an off angle and hit the cover button, he lines up to the cover. Now that our rotation yaw is disconnected, if we hit left and right, regardless of what angle we're looking at the character, he's going to move left and right. And then as soon as we get out of cover, he starts using the controller rotation yaw once again. And this will work on both sides of the cover. So the next thing I want to address is, you'll notice if we go into play and we run our character up into this cover and you face him at a weird angle away from the cover and hit the cover button, he'll go ahead and attach to the cover. He'll rotate all the way around and set himself up to the cover in that particular direction. So what I want to do is I want to perform a check that sees if the character is facing somewhat near the direction that the cover is facing as well. So that way, if we're facing away from the cover and we happen to hit the cover button, he's not going to get into cover. So in our player character here, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to create a new function. And I'm going to call this function check cover angle. And we're going to make this a pure function. So up in the right in the details panel, we're going to go ahead and click on pure. And we're going to want to add an we're going to want to add an output. And we're going to call this good angle. So this is going to return to us whether or not the angle of the cover in relation to the player is a good angle for them to get into cover. So what we're going to do first is we're going to get our actor rotation. So this is going to return the rotation of our actual character, and we're going to want to get our forward vector. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to take that cover rotation, and we want to get the forward vector on this. So now we have two forward vectors, one for our character and one for the rotation of the cover. And we're going to perform a dot operation on this. So if you just hit the period, it'll have the dot product. And we'll go ahead and drag in the connector between the two forward vectors in there. So we're going to drag off of the result of our dot product, and we're going to search for a cos in degrees. And then we're going to check this, and we're going to want to see if the angle is less than a certain amount. So we're going to get a less than, and in here we can set the number of degrees that we're willing to be within in order to take cover. Let's try 55, and we're going to run this guy out to the return node. So we can just clean it up a little bit. And then we're going to compile and save that. And we're going to go back to our event graph here. And at this point, we're going to add this check cover angle in to the front here to our second branch. And we'll compile and save that. Let's try that out. Alright, so that seems to be working right there. So if we're facing away from the cover outside of a 55-degree angle, our player is not going to take cover. But if we face towards the cover, he's going to go ahead and take cover in our cover. And he will jump out of cover regardless of what angle we're facing. The one other thing that I want to add in here is I want them to be able to transition out of cover by hitting the back key or moving away from the cover. So we're going to go into the anim BP, and we're going to add in a couple, we're going to add in a transition rule to moving out of cover. So from the walk left to cover idle, from the cover left to idle, from cover right to idle, and cover walk right to idle. We're going to open up those transition rules, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to get the move forward value, and we want to check to see if this is less than 0. And then we're going to add in an AND operator. We're going to, instead of an AND operator, it should be an OR operator. So I'm going to go ahead and replace all those with an OR operator. And we'll go ahead and compile and save. And let's test that out again. So if we move into cover, and if I hit the move backward button, he will go ahead and start moving out of cover. Now the other problem is when he moves out of cover here, he doesn't exit the in cover transition here. So by pressing the back key, we're having the same problem as when we're exiting the sprint state. So what we're going to have to do is open up these two animations, the animations that move us to idle, so the cover left to idle and the cover right to idle, and we're going to have to add in a way to set the taking cover to false. So if we go back first into our player character, we're going to go ahead and add a new function in here. So the same thing we did with our player controller where we did set as sprinting, we're going to add in a function to set is taking cover. And it's going to have one input, and we're going to call that is taking cover. And we're going to get our is taking cover variable, and we're going to set that. And we're just going to connect up the pins. So we'll compile and save that. In our AnimBP, we're going to open up that animation for the cover low, cover left to idle. And we're going to right click on our notify graph. We're going to add a new notify. And I'm going to call this stop taking cover. And then we're also going to have to open up the animation for the cover right to idle. I'm going to right click, add notify, and we're going to add in that stop taking cover. So we're going to go ahead and save that. We're going to go back to our graph, and then in our event graph, we're going to have to add in that notify. So down here, I'm going to right click, and I'm going to call on stop taking cover. And we're going to want to get our character. So I'm going to copy this try get pawn owner and the cast to the player character. And I'm going to copy that down here. And we're going to go ahead and call on that function. So we're going to call set is taking cover. And we're going to set it to false. So we're going to go ahead and compile and save. We'll hit play. So we'll move into cover. If we hit the back key, he gets up and he doesn't repeat the animation because he still thinks he's in cover. So that's going to complete today's tutorial. So we have some basic cover movement right now. I will continue on expanding our cover movement. In future episode, I'm going to want to make sure that our character stops when he gets to the end of cover. So we're going to have a way to trigger that. We're also going to have to set up our character popping out of cover to aim and moving while he is aiming. So for now, that's going to complete today's video. If you have any questions or comments, go ahead and leave them down below. And thanks for watching.